to everyone and welcome. I think that our broadcast now can start for today's webinar at MEF, our MEF Digital Connect. This is our chance to bring together some of our members and the wider public to discuss some of the key trends, key topics in the mobile ecosystem, in the mobile industry as a whole. I'm Dario Betti. I'm a consultant and executive in telecom and media, but currently here as an industry evangelist for MEF. It's a pleasure then to be your host today and to introduce our topic about Brazil and the privacy law. As you can see, we're going to jump on it quickly. I just wanted to make sure that all of you are aware of MEF is. MEF, the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Somehow you find us, so well done through this webinar. But for the one that don't know what we do, we are effectively a forum, both in a digital and a physical form. We bring people together from the industry of the mobile ecosystem, and that is a lot of variety of players, from financial operations to privacy companies, to operators in telecommunications, to lawyers, regulators, etc. It's a pleasure for us to cover many of the components of the mobile ecosystem, from enterprise communication, enterprise messaging, entertainment services, payment, and personal data. Personal data is a topic for today. We have the pleasure of Rafael Pellon, which is a lawyer in Advogados in Brazil, and I should also say one of the active members for MEF, one of the constituents for our Latin American chapters. So very happy to introduce and give a floor to him and to discuss the topic of today. Before I give away the line to Rafael, one quick mentioning. We have a Q&A topic button over there at the bottom of your screen. Please make sure that this can be as an interactive forum as always. So if you have some questions right now, please add it. And as always, if you want to continue the discussions through MEF, please let us know your feedback, your questions, etc. So my job will be towards the end to try and put together some of the questions and ask Rafa to answer them. That's all for me. I can now leave you in the hands of Rafael and to his presentation on Brazil and the new privacy laws.
Yeah, grazie Dario. Hi guys, good morning from Brazil. So as Dario mentioned, I'm one of the MEF members here in Latin America. I'm a lawyer based in São Paulo and have been working with privacy, data protection laws and regulations, especially on the technology, internet, media and entertainment industries around over here. Let me share my screen with you. You're gonna lose me for a while, but you're gonna hear my voice. So, jumping into it, today what we have in our schedule is a little bit of touch in terms of what are the newest digital laws of Brazil. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how we're doing regulation. We've been basically fighting to pass updated laws for the past 15 years. We have the commercial internet in Brazil for the past 25, so we've spent a lot of years during the meantime without any laws. This caused a lot of issues that we're going to talk about, and we are now starting to see the impacts and the effects of such laws in our daily lives and in companies in Brazil. So before we go into the details for the law itself, it's important to notice we kind of are living right now in this state of what people at Harvard are saying right now. It's surveillance capitalism, where we basically have companies whose sole purpose is to work surveilling people, basically as users, and as you know, delivering advertising on top of that. This has been perfected and kind of matured to a surveillance state, as you can see on the cover of The Economist. I believe it's the edition from July or August of this year. And what we're seeing now is this huge usage of personal data for a series of objectives, mainly in security and advertising. So it kind of become the regular norm that you are online and you are being watched somehow. This brings us to a kind of two privacy paradoxes that we have to deal with. First one is, at the same time, we are dealing with all of these companies and we really like all of these free services that we get from them, these innovative services we get to use on our cell phones and mobiles every day. And we happily give away our data all the time. And we adopt the tools that they provide massively. And by massively, I mean companies that create something new, go from 0 to 100 million users in a country like Brazil in 18 months. So right now, Brazil is, we've just became the biggest city on Uber. São Paulo is the city with the most users at Uber and the biggest number of trips every day, around 50,000 trips every day. Brazil is the second largest country at Facebook with 100 million citizens on Facebook. Second biggest country in terms of usage of Google in the Americas. We just lose to the US. Biggest Netflix outside of the US. We just surpassed 14 million users of Netflix here in Brazil. So yeah, when we like it, we adopt it massively. So it's kind of a norm for Brazilians. And given all of this scenario, of course, we started to have a lot of data privacy concerns that brought us to the laws we're going to talk today. Second paradox is disinformation asymmetry, which is basically how do we know that the data that we are sharing with these companies is the data that is going to be like correctly used whenever we see fit. So the issue is we don't really know all of the potential uses of data when we deliver it for them. So all the time we don't really care about it on the beginning. At the same time, this is highly possible. Like data doesn't fade away, it doesn't go away. So we end up not knowing exactly why, for what purposes these companies are going to use our data, and we kind of don't really think about it. But it's a paradox because it stays there. Jumping into the digital laws in Brazil, one of the things we have been doing since the beginning, we've tried to implement new laws in Brazil since the beginning of the 2000s. Internet in Brazil started in 1995. After a couple of years, of course, we had issues that we needed to address. And we basically tried to create this whole code to adapt laws from Europe mostly and from Japan. So we wrote like this huge code for the internet, and basically it didn't work. Congress didn't pass anything. Congressmen weren't aware of how to regulate this new environment. It was a mayhem. So we basically addressed it from two new strategies. One of them, which is worth mentioning, is we kind of crowdsourced the law, the Marco Civil, which is basically our internet civil rights basically milestone law. It's like a civil code for the internet. It was basically created inside a website where we could get public comments and hearings for like the regular guy, common users every day. So we had 5 rounds of public comments, then some scholars would get the text and would kind of correlate and tweak the text until it was ready. Once it was considered ready for the Congress floor, we basically sent this law to the Congress, and the congressman, incredibly enough, didn't change it too much. it is a global case right now of internet users creating a law that actually affects them on a daily basis. So we end up with a law created by users. And we took this divide and conquer approach where we basically divided this huge code with everything related to digital laws into 3 pieces of regulation. The first one is the Marco Civil, which is basically concerns basic rights, users' rights, and citizenship on the internet. Then we just had a specific data privacy law, which is the one we just approved a couple of months ago, where we address everything related to the collection and management of personal data online. The interesting part is this law has become so big in Brazil. Now it doesn't concern only digital collected personal data, but right now it's valid for all kinds of personal data, both in the online and the offline world, okay? So it's valid for your daily lives on the street right now. And last but not least, the new copyrights law, where we are basically starting the discussions because the idea is once we approve one, we start the discussions with the new law. On the new copyrights law, we're going to address things like fair use, mix and remix of content online, specifically video and music, probably. How to pay for content authors and creators on online environments, online platforms like YouTube, Vimeo, Netflix, and so on. So this is our new conversation for 2020 and 2019. Okay. Going to the Marco Civil, basically we've set up 3 pillars on it. The first one was privacy, although it's more detailed in the new law, the new data protection law. The Marco Civil brought us some basic rules on privacy, especially like for how long you have to collect information if you are a network provider or if you are an application provider, and like we've differentiated. So if you are providing internet infrastructure, you have to basically collect data and keep it for at least 1 year. If you are an application provider, you have to keep it for just 6 months. And a whole set of basic privacy principles that were now approved and kind of more detailed in the new data privacy law. Net neutrality, in contrary to what happened in the United States, this is not regulated by an administrative classification through a telecom agency. So we actually have in our Marco Civil law the classification of what is net neutrality, how it works, and basically is the classic principle from the Professor Tim Wu from New York University, where we are not able and we don't allow any application providers or network providers to treat traffic differently, do any kind of traffic shaping. And we also regulate all of the exemptions of the law. So if a network provider has to differentiate or shape traffic in any manners, we have in the law all of the exemptions that they could use for that, and they are not much, like only in 2 cases. And we have the limitation of liability that was like this huge win for online platforms in Brazil in the beginning of the internet until the approval of the Marco Civil in 2014. So for almost 20 years, online platforms could be held liable for anything wrong that their users were doing. So if I did something unlawful on an online platform like Facebook, Facebook could be held liable for my mistakes. So after the approval of the law, we've basically changed all of the court's decisions and the precedents, and we started to apply it. So the online platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Google, Netflix, and others, they are not liable right now for anything that users upload, create, how they treat with each other online, and so on. Basically, that's allowed us to have this booming online space. We right now are seeing real peaks of usage because we are in the middle of the election period in Brazil, and we are basically seeing like 100 million people interacting on Twitter every day, and interacting on Facebook, uploading videos on YouTube. We're seeing YouTube live videos getting the same amount of audience from national TV newspapers in the evening, and so on. All of this without any liabilities for these platforms, so they are eager to promote their usage and engagement all of the time. Okay. Going to the general data protection law. First of all, it is probably 70% of the European GDPR. So everyone who asks if you are GDPR ready, you are probably more than half the way to be ready to Brazil. So the law isn't in an effective manner right now. It isn't still valid. We gave 18 months for companies to adapt, so it's going to be valid on February of 2020. We have the whole 2019 to get companies to be adapted and adapt all of its systems and services to the law. And we basically have all of these topics that we have to address on it. It is considered right now the most advanced data privacy law in LatAm. The other countries I'm going to show you later this morning, they also have data privacy laws, but created either before GDPR, so they're not so detailed, or they just use it like tiny bits of GDPR, so they don't have all of the detailing, all of the complexity of the GDPR, but at the same time they lack a lot of explanations and clarity for companies operating on their countries. Okay, I'm going to show you this later on. So first of all, the biggest, probably the biggest change with this Brazilian law is we are saying that any personal data has to be related, any piece of information related to an identified or identifiable natural person. So we're not talking about corporate information. We are not talking about anything that is not information for a natural person. So anonym data is out of the picture, and it's not being regulated right now. At the same time, we regulated what is considered as sensitive data and what we are going to treat more heavily and with more detail and with more care. So we are basically taking an approach like the GDPR. So data over racial or ethnic origins, religion convictions, political opinions. At this point in Brazilian life, this is pretty important. Affiliation with any religious, philosophic, or political unions, and sexual and health data, genetic or biometric data when related to a natural person. So sensitive data is the one where companies cannot treat and trade it freely. We need to get specific kinds of opt-in and prior consents before using it. This consent, as in Europe, has to be done separately from the rest. And basically you have to renew these consents every once in a while. So we're probably getting the whole set of emails that Europeans got when GDPR entered in an effective manner in May. What we are seeing right now is a lot of companies are basically trying to dodge away and stop collecting sensitive data. They believe this could become a potential huge problem. So we are trying to move outside of the scope of collecting sensitive data unless it's really necessary. As in the GDPR, we have this extraterritorial applicability, which is basically data collected from Brazilians. Even outside Brazil, the law will be applicable. So if you are in Brazil, and if you are a Brazilian or not, you're going to be subjected to the law. If you are a Brazilian and the data is moving to another country, but it was collected here, and we're basically adopting the same rules from Europe on this one, okay? And we are respecting, of course, GDPR. So any data from Europeans collected in Europe, whenever they come, if we store it in Brazil, we are applying the GDPR. So we are expecting the same manners of treatment of data and the competence of each law whenever applicable. Okay.
May I ask a question? As I know I'm interrupting Rafa, as I said I wasn't going to do it, but I see a question from John, which might be pretty relevant to what you're saying. And if I read it correctly, John is saying, is Brazil planning to go for GDPR adequacy status anytime soon? So that's the question from John. Could you answer that about application for GDPR adequacy?
Let me just take a look at it on the complete. Okay. So basically what we're saying right now is GDPR is valid inside Brazil whenever we have any Europeans that had data collected in Europe from a Brazilian company. Like if we have Brazilian companies operating inside the European Union, we are going to respect GDPR, and we expect the same to be true for European companies operating in Brazil. But then to be respectful of the Brazilian data privacy law. So I think that was it. Did I answer it correctly?
I'm sure we could probably ask to John itself. And the question would be, would applicacy with 70%, would GDPR consider these a friendly territory where you would probably accept each other's regulations on an equal basis? Is it something that it's under discussion?
It's one of the topics I'm gonna talk in a couple of minutes.
And that case,
we have recognition among territories and how we can basically transfer data from one country to another, or from one region to another, using the same principles. So Brazil now is considering Europe and Japan as countries where you can transfer your data to. And of course, the European Union and Japan are considering Brazil as a country where you can store data from these regions as well. Let me go back to my screen over here. Moving on. In terms of data ownership, we are adopting, of course, the ARCO rights that you have in Europe. Some other countries in Latin America, especially Colombia, Chile, Argentina, and Mexico, they also regulated it and approved it, which is basically this concept where users now have some level of control over their personal data. So I think the biggest thing, the biggest milestone here is data doesn't belong completely to the online platforms or the companies that had collected it. Data belongs to its users, and they're just in possession of it. So we have now rights to access such data, correct it, ask for the anonymization of it, port this data from one service to another. This is still a gray area. We don't know how this is going to be put in an effective manner. We don't know how this is going to be executed. The companies in the US are talking about porting data from Google to Facebook to YouTube to Uber to Netflix to Amazon. But aside from that, we don't have any standards that these companies could use. They are still trying to discover how it's going to be done. Exclusion of personal data, and here I'm not talking about the right to be forgotten. We're just talking about a specific company that has your data and you don't have any relationship, any commercial relationship with them any longer. And you're basically, you have the right to just ask for the exclusion of personal data at any time to exclude everything. Okay, it's not taking news pieces out of Google or a search company. Basically, it's personal data that only this company has and uses with you to deliver you personalized services or advertising. And the revocation of the consent at any time, which is basically you have the right to give consent to a company for a specific service, and you have the right to revoke this at any time. Of course, this in 99% of the cases, this means you're not gonna be able to use this company's services any longer, of course. Consent is probably like the most talked way of getting user data, but it's important to notice it isn't the only one. So aside from consent, we have whole other ways of getting user data without asking for permission from them. So in Brazil, what we did, the three first ones to fulfill a legal or regulatory order, to be used for public research institutes and to fulfill the obligations of a contract. This is the same as in Europe. Then we added to be used by healthcare professionals when working on you. So like if I'm in an emergency at a hospital, people are not gonna ask my consent to pick up data about my health and my blood type and things like that. And the interesting clause is we are calling this it's a Serasa clause, which it is. It was negotiated with Serasa Experian in Brazil. We basically said that for credit protection, we don't need to ask permission or consent. So they're still able to run financial scoring without asking for personal consent before doing it. Okay, and we don't have any information whatsoever of what type and what information they collect to perform a score. The algorithms that are going to be used for it, specifically for financial data, they don't have to be shared with anyone, okay? Neither with the government or a regulatory company, nothing like that, okay? This is specifically for the financial industry in Brazil. We've created this concept that working and managing data, personal data, is now a risky activity. So we are imposing the what we call as lawyers the objective legal responsibility, which is basically any company working with personal data. Like it doesn't really matter if you're the company collecting it, if you're the company treating or managing it, if you're the company storing it, or if you're a company delivering advertising based on it. Everyone on the chain of services could be held responsible and respond before courts, before the users, and so on. So I'm not saying everyone will be found guilty or penalized, but anyone on this chain of services can be taken to courts, okay? So it doesn't really matter if you have a responsibility on a data breach, on a misuse of personal data. It doesn't really care. First of all, you show up before courts, then you explain what was your duty or your task on this chain of services, and then courts will decide if these companies can be held liable for paying anything or not, okay? I'm gonna talk about the penalties later on. In terms of accountability, one of the things is it's really tough for anyone, companies, individuals, anyone. It's really tough to do something lawyers call negative proof. So how do we prove that we're not doing anything? It's basically not doing it, but how do we put that in paper on judicial proofs? So we've created this concept of accountability, which is basically, it doesn't really matter if we are in compliance with the data privacy law. We have to show to third parties and other stakeholders that we are actually in compliance with it by not doing a lot of stuff that the law forbids. So auditing, reporting, creating compliance reports from auditors, from lawyers, from data protection officers inside a company or compliance officers is something that is now mandatory. We need to create documentation that's basically from third parties attesting and certifying companies that they are in compliance with the law by not doing any misuses of personal data. Okay, so we use third parties to basically say to the government and to individuals, to NGOs, that we are in compliance with the law. About that, one of the big setbacks during the approval of the law was Congress approved the law with National Data Protection Authority, and then President Temer, who is leaving, he blocked the creation of such a body under the excuse that since the law was presented by scholars, users, and congressmen, but not by the government, it wouldn't be able to create an executive government body or a regulatory body. So the promise was to block the creation of such authority because the budgets of Brazil wouldn't support it without prior negotiation. And in 2019, we would present a new bill of law to create such authority. Given that we are in the middle of the election cycle, we don't have right now any idea from any of the second round candidates from the right and the left, their ideas or their predictions on how this is going to go. We don't know yet if we're going to have a National Data Protection Authority or not. And then there are consequences on top of it, of course. So if we don't have a national authority to take care of this, it means that public attorneys, NGOs, consumer protection agencies, and we've mapped around 45 institutions that would be competent to sue companies. So that means a big company like an online platform or a social network could receive complaints and demands from up to 45 different types of institutions, which is, of course, a mayhem. We are trying to address it by not allowing all of this mayhem to happen and to focus on specific institutions, but we don't know yet. At the same time, it is going to be kind of strange to talk with people who are not specialized in data protection regulation. We will have this initial period of how to create this culture of data protection in Brazil. It is not so common in Brazil right now that we don't have users on the streets really concerned about data protection all the time unless something goes wrong, as probably everywhere else. So we still don't know how this is going to go right now. Personally, I would prefer having specialists to talk with and to create specific regulation. This is not the case so far, okay? We have data privacy officers like in GDPR. We need to appoint nationals to be the interface with the government. A lot of companies already asked me if the DPOs from Europe there are serving as DPOs under the GDPR could be also be the DPOs in Brazil. The law says it needs to be someone who is a national, lives in Brazil, or speaks Portuguese. So yeah, Portuguese lawyers from Portugal could be these guys. Other lawyers that speak Portuguese as well. On data transfer that we were talking about, so basically we said that one of three things. So we asked for specific consent to store data outside of Brazil. Brazil didn't take the path of the other BRICS, so we are not saying data has to be stored within Brazilian borders. We are not saying you need to keep data inside the country. We allow any companies to store data wherever they want. As long as, if you're not storing data in Brazil, you ask for specific consent. What is specific consent? New checkbox with transparent clauses saying, I can store your data outside of your country. On which countries, you don't need to say it. So we don't need to go into this level of detail. You don't need to ask for specific consent if it is for countries with similar regulations. So the European Union and Japan, as of now. Interesting to say, the United States is not considered a country with similar regulations. So you need to get specific consent to store data from Brazilians in the US. Or for the protection of life of natural persons. So this is here, we're calling it the Russia clause. So it's basically, if you believe an individual has data from other countries, like if you have individuals who are in some kind of life endangering situations in Brazil, you can transfer their data from Brazil to other countries, okay? We still believe this was done like in the Europe because of Russia. So yeah, we also have this ability here because of our political history. In the case we have a dictatorship or a strange government in Brazil, companies would be able to take data out of here to protect citizens. Okay. In case of breaches, it is mandatory to alert the government and also users. It's not mandatory to alert users, but that's recommendable. In the case of government, you have to alert to try to dodge any liabilities or damages. What are the liabilities? We had three possibilities of liabilities on the law. So the biggest one are the fines of up to 50 million per incident, or 2% of the annual revenue of a company or its subsidiaries in Brazil in the last fiscal year. So we are not talking about, in the case of a multinational or global company, we are not talking about 2% of the whole global revenue of the last fiscal year. We are talking about the Brazilian revenue, okay? And it's up to 50 million per incident. So it can be 50 million in one data breach, 50 million in the second data breach, and so on, okay? Just bear in mind it's up to, so we are not giving away 50 million penalties to everyone that has a data breach. 50 million is the maximum one, probably for the big shots on the industry, okay? We also had, like in the Marco Civil, the same penalties of suspension of a company to work in Brazil for up to 6 months, and the prohibition, forbidding a company to actually treat data or collect data in Brazil. Both of these penalties were blocked by President Temer, so, and people are kind of okay with it. We're not complaining about these blockages. Basically, the approach the current government took was, if we are able to find, we don't need to block anyone from working or from staying and being in Brazil as of now, okay? We have a lot of cases where we can mitigate penalties. So if we basically adopt any of these measures, penalties and liabilities will be minor. The biggest thing here is this was valid for the National Data Protection, the National Data Protection Authority, sorry. So penalties issued by this government body would be minor if we took any of these measures here. Now we don't have a National Data Protection Authority, and the other public stakeholders that can chase companies, they are not really bound to this. So this kind of mitigation will be taken into consideration by courts, but in an administrative level, whenever dealing with public stakeholders, this could be just ignored. And this is one of the damages that we are getting for not having a specific national regulatory body for data protection. Okay. Last but not least, this is a simple map just showing where we are right now in LatAm. So it's spreading. We are kind of getting this whole sense of data protection that is needed and it's necessary all around LatAm and the Caribbean region right now. So the countries with bulbs in green, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, approved laws that are recent and they are in compliance or they are similar with the European GDPR, okay? So with all the level of details that we've seen on GDPR. The countries with the turtles in red are the ones who don't have any data protection laws whatsoever. So Venezuela, as you might expect, which is on a dictatorship level, so why they're protecting data from users. And Ecuador, which is not yet formal dictatorship, but it's close. So these guys don't protect personal data. The ones in blue with the books are the ones who approved data privacy laws in the last 15, 20 years. They have these simple privacy laws where we define what is consent, what is personal data, but we don't have all of the levels of detail of the GDPR or the laws from Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina, for instance, okay? Mexico is actually one who approved the new data protection law as well, okay? I think that's it. I'm gonna show you my video back again.
So thanks, Rafa. Thanks for taking us through a lot of material there. And the material has already generated quite a few questions. I would probably just go straight to the questions to you from our members and people that have joined the webinar. So the first question from Michelle, I'll just go in line. Michelle says, I would like to understand in Brazil if a Marco Civil is independent on GDPR, can be interpreted on the same way and have the same strengths as before. So Michelle is saying the main difference between the Marco Civil and GDPR in the interpretation as it stands right now.
Yeah, the Marco Civil is not a data privacy law per se. It is like basic ground rules for citizenship online. So we don't, it is of course a Brazilian law, but we don't get anywhere close to the level of detail that GDPR has or the new data protection law has. So it's, in terms of privacy, we had one article saying, if you collect data, just keep it for 1 year if you are a network operator, and keep it for 3 months, for 6 months, if you are an application provider, you have an app, an online service, something like that. Then we had like some levels of detail in a decree that regulated parts of this, how this data should be stored. Basically use encryption, use access control, but we didn't have any rules saying you could store, you have to store this data in Brazil or outside Brazil. No level of detail like the data protection law is bringing right now. But this is the kind of the oldest law in terms of online regulation in Brazil. It's from 2014. It has 4 years going to 5. And right now what we see, the huge impact is because the Marco Civil created this whole culture of Brazilians getting respect and knowing their rights online, so they can push against online companies, and they know exactly what they're dealing with. At the same time, the Marco Civil kind of pacificated a lot of disputes in courts, protecting online platforms so they can thrive around here, and kind of created these levels of people knowing their roles online. So the citizens know how they have to behave and what they can expect or not. Companies know what they can expect, how they have to behave or not at the same time.
Well, thank you. We have probably another 5 to 10 minutes, and if you want to ask some questions now, do it. Or as always, within MEF, our membership, we're always open to discuss with you at any point. But Rafa, as you're here, 2 more questions. One of them, which I'd like to expand on, but it's very specific, which says, if a company is not based in Brazil, but processing Brazilian personal data, is it also required to have a DPO? And maybe I could also say it is, if it's not a Brazilian company, what do we really need to expect to do if you are maybe a European or American company in terms of preparation for this new law?
So if companies from any part of the world are collecting data from Brazilians inside of Brazil right now, they have to adapt to the data privacy law. Basically appointing a DPO in Brazil. We're not saying it needs to be an employee of the company, so it could be lawyers, auditors, third party, or legal representatives, something like that. But you have to adapt, and you're going to have to comply with data privacy law in Brazil. If you're not working or collecting data from Brazilians, you're not bound to it as of now. Okay.
And I'll ask you one more question. Could legitimate interest be lawful ground for processing?
Yeah, this is one of the questions we get the most. The law didn't explain, like in Europe, what is legitimate interest. We expect the national authority to issue a whole regulation or explanation on what could be considered as legitimate interest. We don't have a national authority to do that right now. So it's probably going to be decided upon courts. It's going to be on the hands of judges to, on a case-by-case basis, to disclose and determine what is legitimate interest. It can be considered as a way for you to keep data. It doesn't give you the right, if you have legitimate interest, to basically avoid prior consent. So either you have prior consent, or you're fulfilling with a legal order or an agreement or a contract, or you are treating data for scoring financial purposes. Outside of that, even if you have legitimate interest, you still have to go and ask for prior consent or one of these cases. But this is kind of a gray area of the laws, and it's kind of a battleground that we're going to see, like courts having to deal with it and manage these disputes among public attorneys, NGOs, and activists, saying companies cannot keep data because they don't have legitimate interest, and companies saying that they need the data for a whole set of purposes.
Mm-hmm. We have one question, and probably this will be the last question for this session. And it says, are there any specific regulation or guidelines related to targeted advertising in Brazil?
It's going to be the data protection law right now. So once the law is in place in 2020, we're going to see a lot of, like, the biggest recommendation we can give right now is work with anonymous data sets for targeted advertising. So whenever we are working with anonymous profiling, we are outside of the scope of the law. Okay, I think this is probably going to be the biggest adaptation. So advertising companies and that want to target users will still be able to do it, but they won't be able to identify the natural person, the person who is actually working or being targeted at any moment. Okay.
Well, perfect. Rafa, thanks. Obviously we generated a lot of interest from all the questions we had, which is perfect. I'd like to thank you from MEF, all of our members and the participant of today. I would also like to say that probably Rafa contribution doesn't stop here. Luckily, we have him as part of the members, and it's been a very active one. There's a lot of things that we're already starting to think in different areas in Latin America as well, on the understanding and the implementation of what these set of law would be for the industry as a whole. And as always, MEF is also part of that and participating in terms of the lobbying and discussions within the different areas and the different regulators. So we'll be very welcome to anybody that wants to understand more, to contribute more, to take part and to join Rafa and the rest of our members in this debate. I hope you have also enjoyed this webinar. It will be available for you to download and look at it later on, as always, on our site. If you also would like to know, we have a couple of blogs from Rafa as well, covering the specific of a Brazilian regulation. So more information is definitely available. And as we're talking about personal data from MEF as well, another appointment, which is quite a regular appointment in our calendar. This is the 5th year of a consumer trust study. And in a few weeks, if you're watching these live, or at least in the end of 2018, in November, we will be publishing a study report, just what Rafa was referring to, of how people on the street are reacting to the different regulation laws and some of the scandals that we've seen. So plenty of information and debate is still happening here at MEF, but I'd like to thank you all for being here, and to continue this conversation through MEF at any time, please contact us. You will find us on our website and you will find all our details. We'll be very happy to speak with you. Rafa, a very warm thank you. And anything else would like to say in the last few seconds to communicate with our members?
No, just to say thank you and appreciate the opportunity. I believe we're still on the beginning of the adaptations to this whole new world of working with data privacy laws and creating this culture. We believe it's going to be something really big, and I think we just have to adapt and swallow the pill and start working and using this as a strategy asset. Great.
Thank you all again, and we'll speak soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye.